We are in open session, Mr. President.
Thank you.
All right, so to recap, you met with persons number 1 and 3 in October when they told you what to say in your interview, and 3 or 3.5 weeks later, you were contacted by a male investigator from the OTP. Is that correct?
Answer yes. I was called by an investigator. After 3.5 weeks, he called me and we spoke for a long time, and later we sat down together and we had a discussion.
All right. Now, Mr. Witness, I notice you're giving me extra information that I'm not asking you in your question. You just need to be careful about that, in that doing so you don't inject any personal information or dates or locations.
Let me come in now. Witness, I have to remind you again, it's often the case that sometimes witnesses forget these advice that I give, but from time to time I have to remind them, and I do so to you now, to again listen carefully to the question that has been asked and answer just that question and no more, and then stop. If there is additional information that is needed, the questioner would ask for the additional information. Part of the reason why it is important for you to answer only the question that has been asked is because the person who's asking you the question, when we're in public, has an idea of the kind of answer they might expect from you, and they have an idea that such an answer may not reveal your identifying information, so they ask you the question. If you start answering more than they've asked you, there may be the risk of you putting identifying information in your answer that the questioner has not called for. That's another important reason why you should just listen carefully to the question and answer only that question and stop. Do you understand?
Mr. President.
Answer, yes, I've understood you, Your Honor.
Mr. Steinberg, please continue.
I'm grateful, Your Honor. All right. We'll get back to your conversation with this investigator and your subsequent meeting. I'd like to focus now on the meeting you had in October when persons 1 and 3 told you what to say in your statement. Where did this meeting take place? Is this also in Eldoret?
Rudia tena, sijakuelewa mzee.
Answer, could you put your question again? I haven't understood.
Yes. When you met with persons numbers 1 and 3 in October 2012, the meeting when they told you what to say in your statement, where did you meet them?
Niseme, sababu unaona.
Answer. Do you want me to answer your question? Remember, you told me I wasn't allowed to give names. So, do you want me to answer that question?
Mr. Witness, I've asked you for a place, not a name. If you tell me that the place is going to identify you, then say so, but if not, you can answer the question.
Eldoret.
Thank you.
Answer, Eldoret.
And it was at, if I understand you correctly, at this meeting where you were told what to say in your statement. Do I have it correctly?
Rudia tena, tafadhali.
Answer, repeat your question, please.
Do I understand you correctly that it was at this meeting where persons 1 and 3 told you what to say in your statement?
Ndivyo.
Yes.
What time did this meeting take place?
Ilikuwa mwendo wa jioni, sikumbuki saa ni saa ngapi.
Answer. It was in the afternoon, but I don't exactly remember the exact time.
And how long did the meeting last, approximately?
Masaa matatu.
Answer, 3 hours.
And was it on the same occasion that the email was sent from the internet cafe that you were telling us about? Or did this happen on a different day?
Baada ya kumaliza maongezi ndio tulituma.
Answer, we sent it after the discussion.
Was it on the same day after the discussion, or was it on a later date?
Hiyo siku baada ya maongezi tukatuma.
Answer, the same day after the discussion, we sent that email.
Okay, thank you. Now, during this 3-hour meeting with persons 1 and 3, what did they tell you to say in your statement?
Waliniambia niseme
Answer, they asked me to say
unaweza kuniruhusu tuongee na wakili kwanza?
If I could, I'd like to speak to my lawyer, if you don't mind. I'd like to ask him a question.
We will go to private session for now.
We are in open session, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Steinberg.
Thank you, Your Honor. So before that short break, Mr. Witness, I had asked you whether was it during the 3-hour meeting? No, in fact, let me start again. My question was, during your 3-hour meeting with persons 1 and 3, what did they tell you to say in your statement?
Kwanza kwa hii masaa matatu tuliongea mambo mingi sana.
We talked about different things during the 3-hour period. First of all, we talked about the case, and then we discussed how I was going to give testimony against Ruto and Sang so that I should receive some money. And then we had to change the names, and I received a promise to be relocated in a foreign country.
Tunaambiwa tutoe ni kwamba
regarding the statement, I had to include some events that never took place so as to give it more credibility.
All right. Let's clarify a couple of matters there. Who promised you, without mentioning names, who was it that promised you at this meeting that you would be relocated to a foreign country?
huyu mtu namba 3
It was person number 3. During the interview or the discussion, the person at number 1 was also present.
All right. Again, Mr. Witness, you are giving additional detail that I wasn't asking, so please be careful about that. Secondly, you said there was discussion about the case. What case are you referring to?
naongea kuhusu kesi hii ambayo niko saizi natoa ushuhuda.
I'm talking about this case in which I am testifying.
And what did you discuss about this case?
ni kwamba wakati ule, yani tuandike taarifa ni kama yalikuwa ionekana ukweli.
It was necessary to come up with a written statement that would be credible, and after that I would receive the benefits that had been promised to me.
So if I understand you correctly, the discussions about the case were relating to the statement you were planning to give to the prosecution. Is that right?
Ndivyo.
Yes.
So let's turn then to the details of what you were asked to say. You said that you were told to include certain events that never took place. What events were those that you were asked to include in your statement?
Let's hold off on that answer, witness. What exactly did the witness say on this, Mr. Steinberg? That is the springboard from which you leap now.
Your Honours, I was reading from the record, but I'll go back to it. Sorry, let me just go to line. Sorry, page 65, line 4 and 5. I'm told. Regarding the statement, I had to include some events that never took place so as to give it more credibility.
Did he say he was told to do that? Or did he or I had to include some events that never took place? Is that a neutral information that requires further question as to the origins of fact?
Your Honours, I can clarify, of course, but I do point out that it was in response to my question, what did they tell you to say in your statement, that he gave that answer. All right. Let's just clarify that, Mr. Witness, when you said earlier, and I'll use your exact words, regarding the statement, I had to include some events that never took place so as to give it, the statement, more credibility. Whose idea was that to include those events? Was that your idea, or was this something you were told by persons 1 or 3?
Kama nilivyosema awali, tulipokutana.
As I have told you before, when we met for a period of 3 hours, we talked about the content of my statement.
So my question, Mr. Witness, is, during that discussion, were you told to include certain events, or did you decide to include those events?
Ndiyo, sababu waliniambia jinsi inaenda kuongezeka.
Yes. They told me that I would have to add those events in my statement. those who had had interviews before, from the Swahili interpreter, could the witness be requested to repeat the last part of his answer because the interpreter did not quite understand?
Mr. Witness, I'd like you to repeat your answer, please. The interpreter last heard the words, those who had been interviewed before. If you can please complete that sentence for us.
Sijakuelewa vizuri sana.
Kindly repeat, please. I did not quite understand.
Mr. Witness, we're asking you to repeat. Can you please repeat your last answer? The interpreters didn't catch it. I'll read back to you what the record has, and you can take it from there. Bear with me. The record reads, yes, they told me that I would have to add those events in my statement. Those who had interviews before from and that's when the answer ends. Can you please repeat that answer?
Hapo nilikuwa nimemaanisha kuhojiwa ni kumaanisha walikuwa wameenda kuhojiwa.
What I was saying is that there were people who had been interviewed by the investigators before, and those investigators also wanted to interview me. And in the course of that interview, I was given the content of the discussion, so I was prepared to have that discussion with the investigators.
All right, Mr. Witness, we're going to discuss in due course what happened when you eventually met with the investigators. But my questions now pertain to the 3-hour meeting in October that you had with persons 1 and 3. Do you understand?
Ndio.
Yes.
Right. Well, let me ask you this question. When you're referring to persons who had given statements before you, are you referring to persons 1 and 3, or are you referring to other prosecution witnesses?
Inaongea kuhusu namba 3 sababu
I'm talking about person number 3 because number 1 had not yet interviewed me. The number 3 was with me all the time, and he knew what had been happening. They discussed with number 1. So number 1 and myself, we went and met with number 3 to have a discussion.
All right. Again, you're injecting new information, so let me clarify that. Do I understand you correctly that when you met in Eldoret with persons 1 and 3, person number 3 had already made a statement? Is that right? You can confirm that, yes or no?
Tafadhali unaweza kunisaidia nirudie hapo sababu
I'm sorry, I wanted to repeat what I had said because I believe that you had not understood what I said before.
Mr. Witness, I will ask the questions to clarify, if you don't mind. Can you just, for the moment...
Well, no, he's saying he doesn't think he's been understood. And I'm not sure, listening to the translation, that it was clear to the translator either.
Yes, Your Honours, I heard what he said, and I'd like to put simple questions to try and elicit the information I need rather than let him ramble on.
Well, let's have him say briefly. Witness, can you briefly say what it is you were saying, which you say you don't believe had been understood? Can you now say it? What you said, what you had said before, which you believe was not clearly understood. Let's have it now.
ni mambo tu haya ya under persons ndio naona hatukuelewana mzuri, ndio nilikuwa nataka
I did not think that we had understood each other, and that is why I wanted to explain myself in a few words.
Go ahead.
Nimesema kwa ufupi huyu number 1.
In a nutshell, this is what I said. Person number 1 and person number 3 knew each other. I did not know number 3. Number 1 and number 3 already knew each other. Number 3 knew number 1, but number 3 did not know me. So together with number 1, I went to see number 3 because I did not know number 3. But the two of them had already discussed the matter and they were very familiar with it. On that day, I met number 3 for the first time and we discussed the matter. That is what I said.
All right. That we've understood, but the prosecutor's question is this. You said that during that meeting you had with number 1 and number 3, they told you to include in your statement certain information. Do you understand?
nakuelewa.
Yes, I understand you, Mr. President.
That information they told you to include in your statement, was it information about what happened, or was it information that was made up in the sense that those things did not happen?
Mr. President, ni maneno ya kutungwa.
This was fabricated information to make my statement look credible.
All right. At the time that fabricated information, the time the three of you, according to you, decided to put the fabricated information in your statement. Who came up with the story? Who came up with the fabricated story? I want you to understand the difference I'm making now. It is one thing to say, well, here is a story we are looking at, put it in a statement. It is another matter for somebody to be the one that came up with that story to begin with, that needed to be put in the statement. So what I want to understand from you now is whose idea was it? Who came up with the fabrication?
Ni huyu namba 3.
It was person number 3.
Kwa uchache pia namba 1 akachangia.
However, person number 1 was also involved, but to a lesser extent.
Mr. Steinberg can take it from there.
Yes, thank you, Your Honours. Mr. Witness, I want to clarify one slightly different issue that I was trying to get to earlier. You referred in your evidence to persons who had given statements before you. And what I was trying to find out from you was it persons number 1 or was it person number 3 who had given these statements before you, or were you referring to other people who had given statements before you?
Mimi sikujua watu wengine, nilijua huyu namba.
I was not aware of any other people. I only knew number 3.
All right. So then, between persons number 1 and persons number 3, had either of these people given statements before you to the prosecution in this case?
Rudia swali hili tena tafadhali.
Kindly repeat, please.
Yes. Please listen carefully. What I want to know is, when you met with persons number 1 and 3 in Eldoret for 3 hours, at that stage, had either of these witnesses already given a statement to the prosecution, according to you?
Inaonekana ndio, sababu vile aliniambia alikuwa anaijua.
That is what it seemed like, because based on how they explained it to me, I had the feeling that they knew what was going on.
Well, what did they tell? Did they tell you anything about having given statements, or is this something you deduced?
Hawakuniambia kuhusu statement.
They did not tell me anything about their statements. However, they told me about how my statement would be produced so that it should look credible.
Na kunipatia mwongozo jinsi ya kupatana na hao watu.
They also directed me about how to get in contact with the investigators.
All right. Let me come back to a question I asked you earlier, and that was that you told us you were told to include certain incidents that didn't happen. What specifically were you told to include in your statement?
Wakati huo tukipatana na hawa.
Answer. When we were talking to one another, they wanted us to talk about meetings. I was supposed to mention those meetings as if I had gone to them.
Na kuonyesha kwamba niliona vita mimi.
And I was also supposed to say that I had been a witness, that I had seen things go on while the conflict was underway.
All right, let's start with the meetings. What meetings were you supposed to tell the investigators about in your statement?
Mr. Sir, unaweza kunipatia nakala ya statement yangu? Unaweza ruhusu hivyo?
Answer. Mr. Prosecutor, could you give me a copy of my statement?
We will come to your statement in a moment, but are you not able to recall as you sit there what you discussed in that three-hour meeting with persons 1 and 3 as regards meetings you had attended or supposedly attended?
Unajua ni samani sana. Ngine unaweza sema umesahau.
Answer. I beg your pardon. I might forget some information, but if I refer to my statement, I can refresh my memory. But
Niendelee.
you want me to go on?
No, not for the time being. I will give you an opportunity to refresh your memory, Mr. Witness. What I'm asking you now is, can you recall? I'm interested in your recollection. Can you recall what you were told, what meetings you were told to tell the investigators about?
Ndivyo, nakumbuka.
Answer, yes, I remember.
And what meetings were those?
Ni mikutano ambayo niliandika ambayo ilikuwa na usu.
Answer, those meetings that I mentioned in my statement. The meetings that had to do with the preparations for war. As mentioned,
All right. Sorry, Mr. Interpreter, it's sometimes hard for me to know when the answer is completed. I'm not sure if it's possible to give me an indication, but let me take it from there. Mr. Witness, besides telling you, well, did the persons 1 and 3 give you details of these statements you were supposed to mention, like dates and places and people who attended?
Ndivyo.
Sir, yes.
And why were these details important? Do you know?
Sijakuelewa. So.
Answer, I haven't understood you. Message from the interpreters. We interpreters also find it difficult to determine when the reply has ended.
It's all right, interpreters. You must not add anything to the witness's testimony that he has not said, even by editorial. So you don't have to put markers for us to tell us when the witness has finished. We have to try and figure it out ourselves, but also allows room for the pause in any event. Proceed, Mr. Stadler.
All right. Yes, so my question was, why was it important to include all of these details in your statement? The place of the meeting, the time of the meeting, and the persons present at the meeting, and so forth.
Kama vile nilikuwa nimetaja hapo mbeleni.
Answer, as I said earlier, I was promised something, and that is why I went and said everything that I said to the investigators, and my account had to be credible so that I would be entitled to the money.
Kwa vile walikuwa wananiambia ilikuwa ni mambo rahisi ambaye,
as they told me that the Swahili interpreter requests that the witness repeat the last part of his answer.
Mr. Witness, kindly repeat your answer.
nilikuwa nasema nilikuwa
Answer, I was saying this. Please, could you repeat the question? I'm somewhat tired.
Yes, my question was, will you please repeat your last answer? I will read back what you said and ask you to complete. You said from line 11, as I said earlier, I was promised something, and that is why I went and said everything that I said to the investigators, and my account had to be credible so that I would be entitled to the money. As they told me that, and I ask you to complete or repeat what you said thereafter. As they told you what?
And Mr. Steinberg, can you also give him back the question that he was answering there?
Certainly, Your Honours. My question was, why was it important to include all of the details in your statement regarding the place, time, and persons who attended the various meetings?
maana hii mambo yote ndio tupate majina haya.
Answer, it was necessary to give those names so that my account would appear credible. If, for example, I were to give the name of a particular place because I'm from that place and I know that place. And we were supposed to give all those details to show that what I was telling them was truthful, and in that manner we would get the money and relocation in a foreign country. That's what I said. That's why I said everything I said.
And Mr. Witness, when you say we, plural, we were supposed to give those details, who are you referring to?
Kama nilivyosema awali.
Answer, as I said before, we were with number 1 and number 3. And number 3 had not yet given the testimony. I didn't know person number 3, but I do know that number 3 had not yet given the testimony. So all that to say that number 3 was talking to 2, myself and number 1, with whom we went to see them.
When you say that number 3 had not yet given testimony, what are you referring to? Are you talking about testimony in court, or are you referring about giving a statement to the prosecution?
Sijakuelewa mzuri sir.
Answer, I haven't understood you, Mr. Prosecutor.
Your answer was translated as number 3 had not yet given the testimony. Can you please try and explain again, what do you mean by given the testimony? Are you talking about giving evidence in court, like you are now? Or are you talking about giving a statement like you did in November 2012?
Samahani kama nimesema.
Answer, I beg your pardon if I said the word testimony, I meant statement to the investigators.
So, do I understand the evidence you're now giving is that at the time you met with persons number 1 and 3, that person number 3 had not yet given a statement to the investigators? Is that correct?
Ndivyo.
Answer, that's right.
Can you explain, Mr. Witness, I had understood you earlier to say that from what you understood, that he had in fact given a statement. Isn't that what you told us earlier?
Nilisema alikuwa ametoa statement sababu vile alikuwa anaongea.
I said that he had already given a statement because according to what he had told me, I could understand that he had already met with the investigators because he said what was supposed to happen. And we were supposed to go by what he said. Everything that had to do with the money, the relocation. Every 3 hours, all 3 of the hours were used to talk about these matters, but he was the one in contact with the people who were going to be asking questions of us.
All right. So I'm going to ask you just one last time for absolute clarity. At the time you had this 3-hour meeting, had person number 3 in fact made a statement to the investigators?
I'm sorry, it's a bit difficult. I know it's time and all that, but the friend should bear in mind the screening note as well, which in that particular case...
Your Honours, if we're going to debate this, I request that we would do it in the absence of the witness. My learned friend should know better than this, Mr. Witness, please.
If we're talking about meeting, which is the phrase that's been used, meeting investigators, then it would be a mistake to take the witness down the wrong path in those circumstances, quite clearly.
Let's leave it at that.
I can give you the reference of that screening note.
I have that reference, it's not necessary.
Oh, well, then no.
I would still like clarity, Mr. Witness, so that we don't have to come back to this tomorrow. At the time you had your meeting with persons number 1 and 3, had person number 3 made a statement to the investigators, or had he not made a statement to the investigators?
Do you know that, witness?
Mr. President, wakati huo tulipopata...
Answer, Your Honor. When I met number 1, we went to number 3 and we met in a hotel. And there we talked. I don't really remember whether he had already given his statement, but the way that he was speaking, I could see that he knew what the investigators were looking for. I'm not sure. He was telling us what we were supposed to say. And I said to myself, how did he know that? How did he know what the investigators were looking for and what we were going to get? But I can't tell you exactly whether he had already given his statement, but the way he was speaking was such, and given that that person put me in contact with the investigators, because of all of that, I conclude that he knew how things were and what they were.
Kuona kwangu na
I'm not 100% sure whether he had already given his statement or not, but going by my judgment, I understood that this person knew things that we didn't know about.
sema kuna kitu alikuwa anajua.
I could say that the person knew something. I can say that.
Thank you. In the remaining time, I'd like to move quickly to a different topic. And I'd like to discuss then what happened when you met with the two prosecution investigators, the male and female investigators, at location number 4 from the 20th to the 23rd of November 2012. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Hayakuelewa.
Answer yes.
I request for your permission. At page 78, line 5, Mr. President, it says that I don't really remember whether he had already given his statement. I heard the witness specifically say, I can't say for a fact whether he had given a statement. The distinction is between whether it was a question of recollection or a question of an assessment of where the position was.
Your Honor, I think the answer was clear. He says further down, I'm not 100% sure whether he gave a statement or not. I'm prepared to leave it at that. My learned friend can clarify it when his turn comes if he wishes.
Thank you. So we'll move on then.
Thank you. So, Mr. Witness, turning to your statement, your meeting and your interview with the investigators in location number 4, which commenced on the 20th of November. Is it correct that you traveled to location 4 prior to the 20th of November? Is that right? You don't have to give us the whole history. You can just confirm whether that's correct or not.
Ndio nilisafiri.
Answer yes, I did travel there.
This was before the 20th. Is that right? Was it the day before, 2 days before?
Sikumbuki, lakini nilisafiri kabla ya tarehe 20.
Answer I no longer recall, but I do know that I had traveled before the 20th.
All right. And on yesterday afternoon, when I first mentioned or questioned you about signing a witness statement, you answered as follows. I'd just like to clarify this. The reference is page 65, line 12 and 13. Doesn't matter. Your answer was, when I went to the place where the conversation was held, there was a statement that included some things that were true and some things that were false. Now, my question is, what do you mean that when I went to the place, there was a statement? Can you explain that?
Ndivyo, kwani statement yenye
Answer, yes. That day, I made a statement. In that statement, there were some things that were true and others that were false.
Okay. So if I understand you correctly, you made that statement. The information in that statement came from you. Is that right?
kweli.
Answer, that's right.
And what you told the investigators when you gave that statement, I just want to make sure I understand properly the source of your information. What you told the investigators, is that what you discussed in the 3-hour meeting with persons 1 and 3? Or is there also information that came from you?
Hapo kuna mambo nilitoa kwa huyo.
Answer, some information I provided to number 1 and to number 3. There was some information that came from number 1 and number 3, and some information came from myself.
I see. And just to again get an understanding of times, you said that there was 3 to 3.5 weeks. It was 3 to 3.5 weeks after your 3-hour meeting that you were contacted by the male investigator. Do you remember that?
Rudia hapo sa.
Answer, please repeat your question, Mr. Prosecutor.
All right. I'm just repeating your evidence. Do you recall that you told us that it was approximately 3 to 3.5 weeks after your meeting with persons 1 and persons 3 in Eldoret that you were contacted by the male investigator? That's right, isn't it?
Ndivyo nilisema.
Answer, yes, that's what I said.
So my question is, how long after you were contacted by the male investigator did you meet him and his colleague at location number 4 on the 20th?
Wakati tulikutana namba 1 na namba 3.
Answer, when I met number 1 and number 3, three weeks had gone by so that I could get to place number 4.
Let me ask you,
3.5 weeks corrects the Swahili, and 3.5 weeks corrects the Swahili interpreter.
Mr. Witness, when you first spoke to the male investigator, was that at location 4 Or had you spoken to him previously by other means, for instance, telephone?
Makaratasi ilipo siku hiyo kwa cyber tulipotumana jina.
Answer. At the Internet Cafe, we, through the telephones, and then after 3 weeks, during 3.5 weeks, we spoke to one another, and I had been in touch with that investigator. At the Internet Cafe, we sent an email, corrects the Swahili interpreter.
All right. Now, between the time that you met with persons 1 and 3 and you sent an email which you said was on the same day, when did you first speak? When did you first speak after that to the male investigator from the prosecution?
Sikumbuki, lakini najua tu ni kwa.
I no longer remember, but I remember the period of 3.5 weeks. However, I cannot be very specific. I no longer remember. During those 3.5 weeks, we spoke.
Just to be clear, who spoke? Who did you speak to during those 3.5 weeks?
Huyo mpelelezi mwanaume ambaye nilikuwa nimekuambia jina lake.
The investigator whose name I have given you.
Thank you, Your Honours. I see we are past the time.
But let's see if we can witness. You said that you spoke to the investigator. Can you remember how soon after you spoke with him that you actually met him at location 4?
Mr. President, sikumbuki.
Mr. President, I no longer remember.
Thank you very much. We will leave it at that. The court will adjourn and we will reconvene tomorrow at 9:30. Witness, we will adjourn now. You will bear the advice I gave you earlier, rather the caution, in fact, I gave you earlier in mind. You are not to discuss your testimony with anybody during the period that the court is not sitting, when you're not before us. The only time we want you to discuss your testimony with anybody is when you're back in the process and you're talking to us. Do you understand?
Naelewa,
Thanks, Mr. President. I have understood.
Thank you, and we'll see you again tomorrow. The court is adjourned.
All rise.